Trump is a master at crafting language in a way that gives him an easy out.
Nonsensical gibberish.
He's a character, as we all know.
Is there anyone that he does listen to?
He's a singular figure.
Indeed.
How does Trump feel about his first 100 days? We're thrilled to be joined by Time Magazine senior political correspondent Eric Cortellessa, who just sat down with President Trump for the second time in just over a year. Great to have you, Eric. And I'm curious, because you interviewed him just over a year ago, what was different this time, if anything?
I think the setting and his mood in some ways, right? When I interviewed him in April of 2024, he was coasting to victory. He had just vanquished all of his rivals in record time in the Republican primary. He was better positioned to beat Joe Biden in the 2024 race than at any point that he was positioned to beat either Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden in 16 or 20 respectively. You know, when we sat down with him for Person of the Year in November, he had just won the election, right? He was triumphant. He felt vindicated. But now, I mean, he's faced with the challenges of governing, right? You're confronting him not being able to bring some of his core campaign promises to fruition, right? He said he would solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict very quickly. He said in 24 hours. When I brought that up with him in our interview, he said that was said in jest. It didn't sound like it was said in jest before, but that's what he's saying now. Obviously, the economy is suffering under the tariffs, right? He came into office with a ceasefire in Gaza. That ceasefire is no more. There's all sorts of other challenges he's faced. So I felt that he was more evasive, more cantankerous, and that in a lot of ways he's under siege and in a very different place psychologically than he was a year ago.
That's really interesting to hear, Eric, because when you read it on paper, as I have, so I've read the transcript of your interview, there's a kind of, you know, radical positivity that I think he keeps projecting. For instance, he says his tariffs are, quote, a tremendous success. You just don't know it yet. I mean, that's like the power of willing something into existence when he's just willing to say that to you on the record.
I mean, that's a key part of the sort of Trumpian psychology, right? The power of positive thinking, as he used to put it. But, you know, on a lot of things, it's we're resetting the table, right? It's a disruptive period. Everyone's getting used to the new economic landscape of these tariffs. And eventually you'll see it will have great prosperity. We'll have all this success. So in some ways, he's saying it's already an unbridled success. But when you actually bring up numbers and figures that challenge that proposition, like, hey, you know, the Atlanta Fed says our economy contracted by negative 2.2% in quarter one. How do you explain that? Inflation's basically where it was when you took office. The IMF says it's going to go higher. I mean, sort of like ticking off all of the data. Prices haven't gone down. You know, then he says it's going to get better. So there's kind of a let's wait and see, while also, you know, pitching it as this, you know, great triumph of sort of American greatness, as he likes to put it.
What do you make of, based on that optimism, the juxtaposition between here is the historically least popular president in modern American history at 100 days, and in the same interview saying, many are saying it's the best 100 days ever, and talking about a third term? That disconnect is special.
Well, I think, you know, this is a key part of the Trumpian psychology. He's always talked about the power of positive thinking. He has always been very skeptical of polling and surveys that show him underwater or losing a foothold. I mean, obviously he was, you know, super skeptical in 2016, and then, you know, he was able to beat Hillary Clinton. And since then, he's always looked at polling as sort of nebulous and untrustworthy. I think, you know, one thing I really found is that the more I brought up sort of facts and data that showed he was facing some really key challenges to his governing agenda, and that, you know, certain economic indicators were trending in the wrong direction, it was as if he hadn't heard that yet, right? I mean, I think he's surrounded by people who tell him good news, who tell him what he wants to hear. I think he likes to have people argue in front of him. I mean, the idea that Trump likes yes men isn't totally true, insofar as he likes to have people who argue in front of him and duke it out. He likes to see where the argument leads, and he ultimately takes a position. But I don't think he's really being told a lot of the things in private that I was telling him in the interview, vis-a-vis where the economy is right now and where public sentiment is on various issues.
Yeah, it seemed like the emperor has no clothes, and nobody was willing to tell him that. That comes through in your interview. I want to dive into some of the specifics that he talked about, particularly with tariffs. He's always quite, engaged and animated when he talks about tariffs because he is such a believer and has been for so long. So that really came across. He told you he's made 200 deals with other countries. Why couldn't he name one of them?
Well, it's a good question. I certainly asked him that. No deal has been announced. It's certainly possible that there actually isn't a deal. It's possible that they're waiting to roll out a number of them together. Don't have insight into that. He also said he had spoken with President Xi of China, who had called him. The Chinese deny that. Howard Lutnick told me on the record those talks were underway. Another senior administration official said that they were as well. So it's kind of a he said, she said thing. Basically, it was really interesting, right? He says there's 200 deals and there aren't even 200 countries in the world. But I think when I sort of pressed him on, can you share with whom? His answer was, because a deal is a deal that I choose, view it differently. I'm a department store and I set the price, right? And I think how I interpreted that was Trump has an idea in his mind for the kind of deal he would ink with various countries. He didn't actually say this in the interview, but I know he said this to others, that he looks at it as like a tailor-made suit for each country. And he basically thinks that because of the economic power of the United States and just how coveted access to our markets is, he's going to be able to pressure these countries to submit to the terms he's laying out. So maybe he has an idea about a deal in his mind, but I don't think they're quite solidified.
Yeah, that's not the definition of a deal that I have. I mean, I thought that there were moments in the interview where you are having to interpret in real time. I think, oh, no, in the fact check. What I really appreciated about the interview was that there's a companion piece to it where afterwards you fact check, because as Dave and I were talking about, it's impossible to do it in real time, that the interview would have been completely derailed. So afterwards, you guys go back and provide the fact check of it, where you have to divine what he's saying, because it is open to interpretation and confusing.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the beauty of the platform, right? We get to do the interview. And like you say, if you fact check everything in real time, you just don't have an interview. So you can't do it all. But we are able to set the record straight in the fact check.
You and Time, not just you and Time Magazine have to do interpreting of what he means, because some of his answers are nonsensical gibberish.
Well, I'm curious if you were able to discern what he means when he says we lose $2 trillion a year in trade, because I've searched for it. And there is essentially a $1 trillion trade imbalance, but that, as we all know, is not losing money. We don't want to make Nikes. We don't want to make a lot of the things that we buy from other countries, including most of our clothing that comes from China. What does he mean by that?
That's a really good question. I mean, he sort of did say, when I said you wanted to bring manufacturing back to the United States, this is not everything. I was like, well, like T-shirts, right? Because, some of the tariffs we've imposed are on these very poor countries that aren't able to buy from us anyways. And we don't want them to buy from us, right? And we don't want to sell to them T-shirts or shoes or things like that. So not sure exactly what he means by that. I think one thing that's very interesting, Allison, that you point out is Trump is sort of a master of sort of linguistic trickery, if you will, but the ability to give himself plausible deniability, right? He says certain things and they're open to interpretation. And if, you say something like, well, you said this, he could say, no, I didn't, because he has some sort of out there, some sort of escape hatch. Like a very good example, or classic example that Trump used in the first term, was in the famous call with Volodymyr Zelensky that led to his first impeachment. He later said, he really pointed out when he parsed his own sentence in the transcript, I said to Zelensky, I want you to do us a favor, meaning the United States, not me a favor. And that was his sort of way out of that jam. And so I think Trump is a master at crafting language in a way that gives him an easy out if an interpretation ends up working to his disadvantage of what he says. So it's a sort of, very difficult thing to navigate when interviewing him, but, he's a singular figure.
Indeed. But I also think that we tend to give him more credit for being strategic. I mean, I think some of it's gobbledygook. I think that he just does it. He's just blathering in some of it. And he at some point like finds the end of a sentence. I don't know if it's always that he's intentionally being like the Cheshire cat. But in any event, at one point he says, did he say there's $7 trillion worth of new plants being built? Did
I
I
actually
write
don't
that
recall
down?
him. I don't recall him saying that, but he might have.
Forget it. Can't be right. That cannot be right. I
I
wrote
don't
this
recall
down.
that
That
either.
can't be right.
But I do recall him saying he's a big believer in the Supreme Court. I have a lot of respect for the justices. Does what he's doing represent that? And how'd you follow with that?
This is another interesting part of the conversation where you're really kind of grappling with what Trump understands the situation to be and what the situation is. So, I asked President Trump, you told me when we spoke in April that you were committed to complying with all Supreme Court orders. Are you still committed to complying with all Supreme Court orders? He said he was. I said, Supreme Court just ruled 9-0 that you have to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back. You haven't done so. Aren't you disobeying the Supreme Court? Now, his answer was that he wasn't disobeying the Supreme Court because his people, he said, told him that's not what the order said. And so I anticipated he might say this. So I read from him the order saying that the court properly requires you to facilitate the return of this man as if he was not improperly, mistakenly sent to El Salvador. And, his answer was just, well, my lawyers told me this. I leave it to my lawyers. I don't instruct them. Of course, later in the interview, he did say that he had instructed his DOJ to scrutinize Chris Krebs. But, basically it felt like a lawyer had advised him to give that answer. Or it's possible that the people surrounding him did not explain to him the Supreme Court order. They told him he didn't have to bring it back. And that's what he believes to be true. Hard to quite pierce that. But, again, he's not surrounded by people who are telling him things that he may not want to hear.
But is it also possible, Eric, that that's his way of dodging accountability? There were a few times that he said, I don't know anything about that. My people haven't told me about that. Oh, I'm letting my people handle that. You brought up a few things that he completely dismissed, like, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, I think sometimes he uses his lawyers or others as a human shield. And, it's an effective tactic, right? It's worked for him for a long time.
It is such an intriguing interview. One more part. He says regarding Iran, I think we're going to make a deal with Iran. Nobody else could do that. Does he have that short-term a memory that he doesn't realize he literally ripped up the Obama-Iran deal?
Yeah, I think if you confronted him on that, he would just say, it was a terrible deal. It was a bad deal. I'm talking about a real deal, something like that. The contours aren't all that different, right? Because Iran still gets to enrich uranium. They still get to have a nuclear program. As his envoy, Steve Witkoff, said, they're not allowed to build a weapon. And in exchange, they'll get relief from sanctions. So, we'll see how that ultimately turns out. But it's worth noting that, the basic parameters of the deal that the Trump administration is pursuing is really not all that different from the one that they tore up that the Obama administration clinched.
No, it's just they're much further along with their nuclear program than they were prior, which is the ultimate irony here with the consummate deal maker that everyone voted for.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. I have a question about why he sat down with you, Eric, because it's very interesting in this moment where he's delegitimizing journalism. They're trying to deplatform, traditional news sites. And so Time Magazine calls and he does a big chunk of an interview with you, as he has in the past. So clearly there's something he likes about, or there's something he thinks he's going to get out of this. So what was that dynamic of the negotiation of having him sit down for this?
Sure. I mean, I think at this point, I sort of have an interview relationship with President Trump. We've done it a number of times. And so I think there's some level of trust. I also think, look, Donald Trump is someone whose cultural touchstones date back to the 70s and the 80s. And, I think he's someone who sees being on the cover of Time Magazine as sort of the pinnacle of world fame and recognition. And he loves that. And so, you put those two things together and, every couple of months or so, you can arrange something. I think he also wanted to have a marker for his first 100 days in office. So, I think it was a confluence of things. And I will tell you, after the interview, he took, it took us on a tour of his private office space connected to the Oval Office. And in the hallway, he has tons of magazine covers framed, many of Time, some of other publications, a couple of New York Post front pages. So he loves to have something that he can frame and keep on his wall. I've also seen them on, the walls at Mar-a-Lago and some of his other clubs as well. So,
And they
but I
were
also,
all real covers, because sometimes he would,
well, that is a thing of the past. He doesn't need fake covers anymore because he's had a number of real ones since he's taken over our entire sort of political universe in the last 10 years. But I would also say I do think that Trump's, we're fair to Trump and that he appreciates that. And there's a level of trust and respect.
He's incapable of succumbing to truth serum. I believe if he was honest, he would say being the Time Person of the Year matters more to him than any other single honor on the planet. I was there at the exchange that day.
Oof.
I have not seen him so triumphant, even more so than when he won the election. And I'm sure you were there. I'm curious one thing. You said you saw some magazine covers, but part of the Time spread also shows this photo. And there is a picture in the background there that is of course, the day that his life, an attempt on his life was made. And that's a painting of that day. Mm-hmm. He pulled down a portrait of Barack Obama and put this painting up. My reporting would suggest that was a gift from Vladimir Putin. Do you have any reporting on that?
I believe that Witkoff said that it was the painting that Putin gifted him. So, that's interesting. But also, I mean, it's like there is such constant competition in Trump's mind with his Democratic predecessors. I mean, he always brings up Biden. Biden would never do this. Biden would never do that. He puts his painting on the wall here, puts Obama's somewhere else down the hall, and says, more people come to view my painting than his. I mean, he's definitely always thinking about this comparison and always trying to beat and outdo those who previously held the same office as him.
Wow. Yeah. So tell us, Eric, I mean, what was your biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. As far as my biggest takeaway, I think the first was kind of what we talked about earlier, which is just how different he's seen from the last time we'd spoken. I think also the fact that, certain questions he found to be, he didn't really want to answer them. He didn't have answers for them. I mean, we really talked about Doge, for instance. Why is your government amassing all this personally sensitive information about every American in one place? They're previously intentionally kept separately. He didn't really have an answer. He said, we want to find waste, fraud, and abuse. When we talked about all sorts of other things, he kept reverting to others in administration. It felt like there were a lot of things that were happening on his watch below him through his subordinates that he was sort of unaware of. Either he was unaware of, or he's using them as shields and doesn't want to say that. So, I found that to be really revealing about sort of how he is thinking about his presidency. What are the things that he cares about? What are the things that he wants to talk about? But I also think that he has empowered a lot of people in his administration to embark on, a really aggressive, radical agenda that he is not fully apprised of all the time.
Is there anyone that he does listen to? Is Elon Musk on that short list?
I think he listens to people. I mean, I think he trusts his instinct above anyone else. I mean, he sources close to him, people in his administration, I know, will talk about he really puts people through a rigorous process when they're about to make a big decision. And he wants arguments to be hashed out, and he wants to hear everyone. He wants people to disagree with him in private and respectfully. Once a decision is made, he wants everyone to honor it at that point. But I do think, Susie Wiles is really trusted. Susie Wiles will tell him when she thinks he's making a mistake. You'll have arguments between different factions within the cabinet. I do think Donald Trump is willing and likes to hear dissent, but he likes a kind of respectful dissent in which the objective is to help him succeed. And if he thinks that there's any other kind of motive or agenda, that's when you're going to be in trouble. So I think, he has a pretty competent group of lieutenants who have helped him, take back this really remarkable political comeback, right? And, we'll see how things ultimately turn out, right? There are things that haven't gone well in the first term. but he's got a lot of people under him who he trusts and who have a really open line of communication. You also notice that there are way fewer leaks in this administration than there were in the first administration, and that's because people are more aligned than there were. You don't have competing, subgroups within the administration fighting each other and trying to knife one another.
Except for the Pentagon. I mean, speaking, it's interesting for us to hear you say that he has competent people around him, because, his choice for some of the cabinet members would belie that.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say, like, there's cabinet members and then there are lieutenants, right? And so I think the people who work with him closely, a lot of the people who are closest with him inside the White House, right, his own operation, they're people who came from the campaign, right? I mean, that's one thing you've really seen, is that Donald Trump has surrounded himself with campaign people who internally have often clashed and overrode the bureaucracy. Now, Hegseth is a cabinet choice, that's a whole other thing. But I think when it comes to Trump's inner team, his inner sanctum, he's got a group of people who are kind of battle tested with him through a long and arduous path to get to the White House.
But his scoreboard for decades has been the stock market. The S&P just finished its worst 100 days in modern political history. And that's just the dollar. The US dollar had the worst 100 days since Nixon. I could go on and on. He is historically underperforming on the economy. Is he delusional to that fact?
Hard to get inside his mindset. I think he is, he's aware that the stock market. He does, actually. He'll say, well, the stock market goes up and down, had a rough couple months, rough couple weeks since Liberation Day. He acknowledges the volatility. I don't think he acknowledges the fact that we were on April 9th on the cusp of a serious financial crisis because of what was happening with the bond market and the fact that U.S. treasuries were basically losing their value and they were no longer trusted as a haven. I mean, that was very, very serious. And, it was self-induced, of course, this near crisis. I think Trump does recognize what's going on with the stock market. People on Wall Street will say he used to care about us. He doesn't anymore. His sense is that it's short-term pain for what he believes will be long-term gain. Now, the big question, though, for us, in terms of what's Trump's mindset really all about, and I try to get at this with one of my questions, is what's the actual objective of the tariffs, right? Does he want to reshore production? Does he want to rebalance trade agreements? What does he want, right? Because you can't do all of these things at once. And so the question I asked President Trump was, if we still have really high tariffs on foreign imports a year from now, whether it's 20%, 30%, 50%, would you consider that a victory? And he said, total victory, because we'd be making all this money, right? Which goes to say that he's not just using tariffs as leverage in order to renegotiate better deals. He actually sees it as a revenue generator for the United States. And he's talked pretty openly that he believes he can maybe eliminate the progressive income tax and replace it with external revenue that we derive from tariffs. Maybe he really believes that.
This makes my freaking head hurt. And did you follow on that? Because look, I'm not telling our audience anything they don't know. We don't collect a dime from tariffs. Importers pay them. The U.S. doesn't take in a dime. Ultimately, it's an added tax to U.S. consumers. How does he square that circle?
I don't know. I think he believes that he'll make it so expensive for companies to outsource production to other companies that they'll start building plants here, and that will ultimately reverberate to the rest of the economy.
He told you we're taking in billions of dollars right now, which I can't figure out for the life of me.
That's the conundrum, I will say.
That's where the math doesn't add up.
I have a couple unrelated questions, but you reminded me of one thing that actually blew my mind more than anything in this interview. And it's that he said there has never been a group of people that's been treated so horribly as the J6 people.
This is what makes my head explode.
Never. I don't know how many examples we could bring up.
He was like, no, there was one, but I won't mention that. Like, he allowed himself, as to your point, Eric, that there might be magical
one
group of people, but he's not going to specify who.
Never mind our history of racism, of slavery. I mean, the whole that. What did you think of that statement?
Yeah, it was something that I would imagine Trump would say. I mean, he obviously thinks that the prosecutions of people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th was wrong. He thinks it was a miscarriage of justice. And there's a reason he pardoned or granted clemency to every single one of them. So I think Trump believes they were treated wrong.
And even if you believe that, to believe that they've been treated worse than any group is special. Again, quickly, did you interview Biden late in his presidency? There has been books now dedicated to the fact that we, the media, ignored the mental decline of the commander-in-chief. And I do find it rather concerning. Did you interview him late in his presidency and witness that firsthand?
I did not. My colleagues did. Our Washington bureau chief, Massimo Calabrese, and editor-in-chief Sam Jacobs interviewed Biden in, I think it was May of last year, so about a year ago. And I will say, to their it was a great story and it was a great interview. And to their credit, they pointed out just how old he was and seemed in their conversations in the story. So I was not there for that myself, but my colleagues interviewed him.
It is an interesting story. I do think it was one of the great failures of media today.
But I mean, Dave, well, we can talk about it later, but I
No.
mean, it was hiding in plain sight. I mean, Biden gave a lot of press availability. I'm not press availability. So a lot of
Very
no.
few, if
Okay,
any.
stop. Meaning like a lot of live events, because I covered them on CNN. Every day he would have a live event in front of a bridge, a dilapidated bridge, and you could see his decline. The American public could see it. So I guess that this entire narrative about how the press covered it up somehow, like we took it live. We took his events live every day.
Any other president would have been covered differently. As Trump was his first term, his mental decline became a serious issue.
And on that front, Eric, just quickly, did you see any difference? I know you said his mood was different and that he seemed more sort of defensive or caustic, but mentally, do you see any difference from the previous times you've covered him?
No, I mean, I think he's a character, as we all know, and basically I felt there was no change in that respect with President Trump in our conversation last week.
One person in politics or out of politics you would love to sit down with one-on-one?
Bruce Springsteen.
I knew you were going to say that because I saw it. That's part of your avatar, your background.
Yeah.
Bruce is your guy, huh? You're a boss man.
Huge boss man. I've seen him in concert many, many times. And last time I saw him was on the beach at Asbury Park last, was it September? Yeah, it was September. It was pretty amazing. If that answer was dead or alive and I was going to limit it to a political person, it would have to be either, let's say, an American political person. Roosevelt or Nixon would be so fascinating to interview. Especially Nixon in those later years after he left the office in disgrace. You go and watch them. He's pretty forthright. I mean, he's pretty interesting. He's pretty interesting in his introspection there. And what a fascinating and cautionary tale he was.
If you could figure out Springsteen's key to vigor and energy and youth, my God, bottle that. That guy's amazing.
Yeah. Are you a Jersey guy?
I am not. I did live a little bit when I was a young person in New Jersey, but I'm not a Jersey guy. But I love going there. I'm a regular in Asbury Park and the Stone Pony, and many of my heroes emerge from New Jersey, whether it's Springsteen or the great Philip Roth or others.
Favorite Bruce song?
I guess
Born to Run, easy one for me.
No. Thunder Road.
Thunder Road. Eric?
Oof, I can't pick a favorite.
You can't straddle the fence here. This is an interview.
Well, I love Born to Run. I love Thunder Road. I love, a lot of the stuff from the early albums, Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town. If you really had to put a gun to my head, I might say a song like Racing in the Street, or a song like My Hometown, The River. My hometown is so powerful. And, it was one of the few songs at that point in 1984 that really dealt with what was happening with the decline of Rust Belt cities and the hollowing out of towns and, You know, very few other popular artists were writing about what was happening to the white working class as Springsteen was. And look where it ultimately led. I mean, a milieu like the one written about in my hometown is really kind of ground zero for where the Trump base and the Trump constituency emerged.
This is so revealing because there are two kind of music fans in the world. I'm guessing you guys are the same.
Mm.
I don't ever think what a song was about.
Oh my God.
I literally just like what I hear. And I once told my wife, like, a song made me think of her, and she's like, that song is about death. I'm like, oh, like, I didn't know what my hometown is just like.
Wow.
I just hear Bruce. And
that's amazing. No, I've parsed the lyrics.
Yeah, you guys are intellectuals. I'm a knucklehead.
That's exactly right.
All right.
It's like when people play.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was just saying, it's like when people play Hallelujah at a funeral, Leonard Cohen, and it's about sex, you know. Of course, sex is the life force, but there you go.
Born in the USA has become a massive celebratory patriotic song.
Right.
It's probably the best example ever, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I actually do know what that one's about.
Wow,
so
impressive.
I think Bruce once said it was the most misunderstood song since Luai Luai. I think of it as a patriotic song. It's just not the patriotic anthem that people interpret it as. You know, I mean, it's a song about someone who thinks his country is better than it has been. And you know, it's actually just, it's a phenomenal song.
Mm-hmm. So Eric, we end every one of our podcasts asking our guests for their dose of sanity. So how are you getting through these maddening days as a journalist? What do you do to stay sane?
Lift weights.
Let's see the guns. What do you got? How much?
No.
How much?
No violence. No violence.
Fair enough. Good
you.
answer.
Good for you. Thanks for all the time,
Eric Cortellessa, senior political correspondent at Time Magazine. Really appreciate it. Terrific interview. Love to have you back.
Thank you. Great to be with you.